everybody. Welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and joining me on the show, Will Ragatz. We are going to have a little fun summer football talk here where we break down Will's article naming his all-quarter century team for the Minnesota Vikings. And Will, this is a great time in our lives to do stuff like this. Stop and look at the last 25 years and go position by position and name an all-quarter century team. So here's my first question before we start diving into each different position and all the individual decisions that you had to make. Was this a struggle for you, or did you find this to be kind of straightforward? Because as I was reading your article, which is over on SI on Vikings and Bring Me the News, I was kind of like, how can I fight Will over some of these picks? And I think we're going to struggle to fight each other, but we can go through some of the positions that maybe were a little more challenging.
Yeah, it was fun. I wouldn't say it was a huge struggle. I was just kind of estimating with you before the show. I feel like 75% or so of the picks are pretty straightforward, and there's not a whole lot of room for argument or debate. And maybe you could come out of left field and make a bold talk me into type of case for somebody. But that does leave 25%, maybe a little more, of the spots that you have to do some consideration. And I think the biggest thing that I wouldn't say I struggled with, but that I had to figure out how to weigh is peak against longevity. And how do we factor that in? Am I making a team that is the best guy of one season in the last 25 years of Vikings football to go out and try to play the best possible football at that position and win a game? Or am I going to consider the longevity as well? And I think you have to, because the purpose is kind of try to reflect the best players at each position of the quarter century. So there's no exact right answer for how you weigh those two things. I tried to incorporate both, and I think that's where some of the difficulties can come in. But yeah, I mean, it was a fun exercise. It was cool to look back on some of the more recent guys that I've covered over the last 5-6 years, and then also some of the players from my childhood. And I even had to do a little research on guys like just before my time, because we got to include the early 2000s here too before I was really old enough to be super locked in. But yeah, it was a fun time.
So here's a couple things I want to do. Number one, I want to try to go into maybe some devil's advocate arguments with your team. And I also want for each position us to name a completely random guy, but just a complete, like make an all super random quarter century team as well. And it's just there's no rhyme or reason. It's just who comes to your head, totally random guy. So let's start out with the quarterback position. So you've got Dante Culpepper. I would agree with you on Dante Culpepper. The high end, going to Lambeau Field and winning a playoff game there, getting to the NFC Championship, kind of taking the NFL by storm with Randy Moss, the excitement level, the entertainment level. But if I'm making an argument that's against Dante Culpepper, again, which I would not agree with, but let's just try it, I think it would be a couple different things. Number one would be the most memorable season of the last 25 from a quarterback came from Brett Favre. There's no other nomination there. There's a lot of good seasons, including Sam Darnold last year, but Brett Favre had the best season of the last 25 years. And with Kirk Cousins, there was a lot more consistency with Kirk Cousins' quarterback play, because even in his bad years where they missed the playoffs, Kirk still put up huge numbers in 2020, still put up good numbers in 2021. He was pretty much the same quarterback every single season, and how much success they had a lot to do with, did they fire an offensive coordinator, or did they build an offensive line that was reasonable enough? Did they run the football a little better and things like that? The accumulation of Kirk is, I think, a little bit more robust than the accumulation of Culpepper, even if Culpepper's best 3 seasons are better than Kirk's best 3 seasons. So is there an argument, do you think, for either Favre as just like the single best for the last 25 years, or for Cousins having more consistency through his time here?
Yeah, there definitely is. I think if you, like what I was talking about, if you want to do the peak, the best quarterback season, Brett Favre is up there. You could also argue, I think, 2004 Dante Culpepper being up there as well with the statistics and how fun that team was. The numbers he put up that year were pretty ridiculous. To me, I didn't really want to do just a one season guy. As great as 09 Favre was, as great as 2024 Sam Darnold was, honestly. This came down to Culpepper and Cousins, and I actually think it's one of the trickier debates. Like, I think there will be a lot of people who could make an argument for Cousins that, I would absolutely listen to. To me, it came down to kind of adjusting for era a little bit, because Kirk Cousins, the raw passing stats, like if you pull up one of those stat head comparison things, the raw passing stats for Kirk Cousins are better. Fewer interceptions, better passer rating, things like that. But with the eras, like this football was just different in 2003, 2004 than it was in 2022. And the league-wide passing stats. So that has to matter. If you look up, Pro Football Reference has this kind of era adjusted passing stats, and you look up Dante's, his net yards per attempt adjusted to era. He had 128 with 100 being average in 2000, 126 in 04, over 100 every year, 113 in 03, below average in 05. But then you look at Kirk, and he's kind of consistently with the Vikings in the 115, 108, 122, 110. So the peak wasn't there of that close to 130, 30% better than league average season that Dante had twice. And then you factor in the rushing stuff as well, which those stats don't measure. I think that has to mean something too, because Dante was an absolute freight train when he was able to get out of the pocket and get in the open field. And so you can make the argument either way. There was some frustrating turnover stuff with Culpepper, some inconsistency, but I think the peak was higher. Both played 6 seasons, so the sample is pretty much the same. And I just think adjusting for era, that's where Culpepper won it for me. But it's pretty close.
I agree with your methodology of not going with someone who just had one great season, because they've had that numerous times. So then it only really comes down to 2 players, essentially. And if you were just going to do a tie break, the running matters a lot for Dante Culpepper. And they both had some similar ups and downs and streakiness. What Kirk had in the early part of his time here, 2018, 2019, was a really good defense. But then in common, they had that 2020 Kirk stats are great because they're playing badly on defense. There's a lot of shootouts. That was a lot of Culpepper too, where they never had good defenses during the Culpepper era, and they were playing in a lot of shootouts. I might go Ty goes to the entertainer. And I think Dante Culpepper over the last 25 years in football would be a top 5 entertainer, along with Michael Vick and Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, the guys who have Mahomes, guys who have these just wild plays, crazy throws, throwing it from the opposing 40-yard line to the end zone to Randy Moss streaking down the sideline. And I think Culpepper's era was a little more defined by excitement of Culpepper emerging on the scene and getting them to the NFC Championship game. And, where you have Cousins, it was more starting with frustration. And a lot of times it was frustration that it just wasn't getting to that next level. And Culpepper would have won this, I think, easily had 05 not been a disaster. They let their offensive coordinator go because they didn't want to pay him. And then he ends up getting the injury and so forth. But I think Culpepper does get this, but Kirk is probably right there. Who do you think? Do you think that if you had to, how about this before we move on to the random quarterback? Like if you had to win one game from any Viking quarterback over the last 25 years, like you've got to win one game against the best team in the league, who would you pick?
That's tough. I think that's probably 09 Favre. And that's a gamble there, in the same way that picking Dante would be, where that could go really, really well, or it could be a few dumb interceptions in there and you're losing to this hypothetical best team. I just think 09 Favre, the gunslinger that he was, how experienced he was, gives you a really good chance against anybody. But I mean, to your point, I completely agree that just if it was even closer statistically, I think I tried to be unbiased here, and I think statistically it's Dante Culpepper. But if it was even closer, I think that tiebreak of the entertainment and the style of play and how fun Dante was. And admittedly, like, I'm watching Dante Culpepper when I'm like 8 years old or 7, 8 years old, and I was covering Kirk Cousins, so there's some nostalgia there. But I mean, the hitting the whatever you want to call the celebration, just the joy that he seemed to play with, that I think that would factor in just a little bit here as well.
All right, who is your random quarterback?
There's so many of these, but the name that jumps out to me is Brooks Bollinger, who was sometime, I want to say, like mid to late 2000s. I think he went to Wisconsin. He was just the kind of perfect example of a very mediocre 2000s Vikings quarterback. I don't know that I have like extreme memories of Brooks Bollinger or like what he did, but maybe the alliteration helps his name stick in my brain too. So that's who I'm going with.
Folks, for weeks now, I've been using Tempo meals to cut down on the amount of times that I go out for fast food. And as you guys know, for me, that is quite an accomplishment, but it's worked. I feel like I'm in better shape and big time saving a lot of money from going out to eat constantly. Tempo is a weekly delivery service that delivers chef-crafted meals from a dietitian-approved menu fresh to your door. I do nothing and they show up. Their perfectly portioned lunches and dinners take the guesswork out of eating. They are well prepared. They're easily heated up in the microwave in just 3 minutes. I'll tell you, some of my favorites: barbecue chicken, Tuscan butter shrimp, fantastic. Korean beef quesadilla, all this stuff is great. And those are my preferences, but there are dozens and dozens of options to fit whatever you like for your diet. It takes about 5 clicks to order. So for a limited time, Tempo is offering my listeners 60% off your first box. Go to tempomeals.com/Purple Insider. That is tempomeals.com/Purple Insider. 60% off for your first box. Again, tempomeals.com/Purple Insider. Rules and restrictions apply. This episode is brought to you by Denisa Tova and her team at TOVA QDRO and Retirement Valuators. This message is specifically for the divorce lawyers out there who listen to the show, and I know you're out there. It can be a huge challenge to help people split up their stuff, including retirement accounts. That's where Denisa and her team come in. Most of the legal language when it comes to 401ks and IRAs is stuck back when they had single bar helmets and barefoot kickers. So let Denisa help you get up to speed with the Settlement Language Lab. It's like a training camp for your law firm, a quick and easy set of drills to help you avoid losing money for your clients. No sales pitch, just answers. So if you want in, go to LinkedIn and search Denisa Tova, that's DENISA TOVA, and message her or click on the Schedule the Settlement Lab button and let her know that you heard of her through Purple Insider. Also, check out her podcast, Beyond the Bar. I have been a guest, by the way, and listen to the interviews with lawyers, judges, and celebrities. With Denisa, it's lawyers only, no fluff, no gimmicks, just real help. All right, back to the show. Brooks Bollinger, 06 to 07, started one game, went 0-1. Went 46 for 68 passing, 537 yards, a touchdown, 2 picks, and an 84.0 quarterback rating. Shout out to Brooks, who was once on the radio with me. Great guy. I will go with I'll go with Spurgeon Wynn, because Spurgeon Wynn has the name element to this. And also, if you're picking the most random of all random quarterbacks, a guy with a name that stands out who just did atrociously. I mean, you could not have played worse than Spurgeon Wynn did in his 2 games as a Minnesota Viking. He completed 49% of his passes, threw 6 picks to 1 touchdown, and ended his Viking career with a 38.6 quarterback rating, which, as you know, Will, if you just threw the ball directly into the ground on every single play, it is a 39 quarterback rating. Spurgeon Wynn was worse than doing nothing. And there you have it.
That is a good one. I like that.
I think we're going to have more fun with the random running backs than we are the pick. It's Adrian Peterson, and I know ESPN did theirs, and I know a bunch of Vikings fans were mad. Well, they should have been. Obviously, Adrian Peterson should have been on that list. I have no idea how you pick anyone over him in the last 25 years in the NFL at the running back position. I think he's probably the best running back of the last 25 years in the entire league, certainly the most dominating. And I mean, I love Priest Holmes, but he's not Adrian Peterson. So clearly, if he's the pick for the entire NFL for me, then he would be the pick for the Minnesota Vikings. Who is second for you? Is that Dalvin Cook?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's Dalvin Cook off of that peak run he had from like 2019 to 21. The 22 numbers are pretty good too, but we know the advanced metrics in that first Kevin O'Connell year were kind of rough. So he 2019 to 21. You can give Dalvin Cook 22 as well. He had the big run against the Bills, the huge catch against the Colts, some moments. 2020 was like, I think, the season where he really peaked and was just incredible. Like I'll remember that game at Lambeau in the COVID season where he had like 250 yards and 4 touchdowns or something along those lines. That was pretty incredible. So I think he's 2. I don't know. I don't think Robert Smith quite got enough into the 2000s, or maybe he did.
Just 2000. He had a great season,
okay.
But it was just 2000.
Okay, just 2000. So no, not him. And so I'm trying to think of who else it would really be. And Chester Taylor had one good season too.
I thought that there would be actually some more guys mixed in, but truly it's Dalvin Cook. And then the next from the 2000s is Michael Bennett, who was one of the fastest players ever, probably in the NFL. And then Chester Taylor after that. And then the next guy on the list from the 2000s is Dante Culpepper for rushing yards.
Are you going by yards here? Yeah.
Just by yards. And then Alexander Madison and Jerick McKinnon, and then Latavius Murray. You throw in Mo Williams a little bit there. I mean, Leroy Hoare didn't get into the 2000s. I mean, so there really isn't much of a second place outside of Dalvin Cook. There was always a little bit of a desire, I think, from fans who had gotten frustrated by Peterson and the off-field stuff and the lack of pass blocking and catching and stuff, that wanted to say like, oh, Dalvin Cook's actually better or a better all-around player. He wasn't. No, he never turned into, this is the thing about Dalvin Cook, is that he had a really short run with the Vikings and he never turned into the player that they said he was going to be. So even though he was a great runner, he was the same as Adrian Peterson. He was not, if you go by their metrics, their PFF blocking metrics, he was not a better pass protector. There's very few running backs who are actually good at it. And he never became the pass catcher. He had one great year in 2019 of screens, but never really was that, oh, they're going to line him up in the slot and all that sort of stuff. That didn't happen. He was a one-dimensional running back who was really good for about 3 halves of seasons. 2019 first half of the season, amazing. 2020 first half of the season, amazing. 2022, pretty good. But that's about it, really, for Adrian Peterson or for Dalvin Cook's career. So it doesn't even begin to whiff Adrian Peterson. I did name some random running backs, but not random enough. Who's your random running back?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a really deeper cut here. The recent one from like my era of covering the team would be shout out to Mike Boone, who people thought were gonna like. People thought he might break through at one point. He had that one game late in the 2019 season, not against Green Bay, maybe against Chicago at the end.
Chargers. He had 19 against the Chargers. He was great. Okay. He kind of came in like mop-up duty and went off.
Sure. And then he had a big opportunity on a big Sunday night game at home against Green Bay, and it didn't go well. Like he was the starter in that game. And then I think the meaningless game against the Bears, he ran for a bunch of yards. But that would be one. And then I'm trying to think of an older one. And I'm only drawing my guy from Stanford, Toby Gerhart. That doesn't feel quite deep enough to me though. Maybe that is.
I think at this point at one point, because he would have been talked about so much as a second round pick and he was so popular in college.
So good at Stanford.
Right. But now definitely not that.
Shout out to Toby Gerhart. I got some Stanford people in my family. So I remember watching him play a bunch in college and thinking he was going to be the truth, and it just didn't happen. But
Ontario Smith would have been a random one here if not for the Whizzinator incident, which makes him famous, but not his rushing. He only ran for 1,100 yards. I'll give you a deep cut, and unfortunately, this guy is not with us anymore. Sadly, Ronnie Hillman. Remember Ronnie Hillman?
Yeah.
He was a Super Bowl champ with Denver, and then came to the Vikings. Was only a Viking for a very short period of time, and then that was it. But he had a really great, I think it was a catch against Detroit and ran down the sideline in 2016 when they were trying to replace Adrian Peterson. The ultimate, though, if you really want the random of the random, it would be Stephen Ridley. Stephen Ridley is the random of the random because
he played for the Vikings in a regular season game.
Let me tell the story. So he didn't, but here's the story. So when Adrian got hurt in 2016 and decided to have the whole surgery instead of the shaving of the knee because he thought he was going to play till he was 45, the Vikings brought in Stephen Ridley and they signed him. And because he had a decent history, we all assumed that Stephen Ridley was going to be Adrian Peterson's replacement to go along with Jerick McKinnon and Matt Asiata. So we interviewed Stephen Ridley at his locker. He had a real good conversation with the media about kind of where he was at and everything else. Every person in the group wrote our stories about Stephen Ridley's ready to keep the Vikings running game going post Adrian Peterson. Here's all these great quotes and everything. And they cut him 2 days later. So we all sat down at laptops and wrote the same story about Stephen Ridley. And then I don't like to bring back the curtain too much on the goings on of the media room, but I decided to create a Stephen Ridley Hall of Fame in the media room. And so I put like his career statistics for the Vikings: 0 runs, 0 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 yards per carry, 0, right? All that sort of stuff. And I created a map with all of Stephen Ridley's different locations that he had been, including Minnesota, that kind of thing. So Stephen Ridley technically was a Viking, but did not play in
That's
a game.
like Ito Smith was on the Vikings, but didn't play. He played in the preseason game. It didn't. Wayne Gallman, I think, actually did play in a regular season game or two for the Vikings.
That's a great one. Because I called him the
These
Sheriff.
are the guys I remember from doing. I do the football immaculate grid every day, so you gotta have like the Wayne Gallman spots ready to go.
I remember I called him the Sheriff. It was like, Sheriff Wayne Gallman's in town. Everybody hide. Okay. Anyway, well, we'll carry on. We'll never finish this if I tell all the stupid stories from random players. But I like the flavor it's adding. Wide receiver is just not competitive at all. Kind of like running back. You've got Jefferson, Moss, and Thielen. I don't know how you could do it a different way. I suppose you could, if you were stretching it. Here's the question on this. It's not, okay, Moss, Jefferson, Thielen. If you're stretching it to 5 wides, because Diggs would be the next guy on the list. If you're stretching it to 5, or maybe there's like a Diggs Thielen competition, but the way that it ended with Diggs, even though he's the Minneapolis Miracle Man, you got to go with Thielen because he continued to have a couple more good years after Stephon Diggs left. But who would be the 5th? Who would be the 5th wide receiver after that?
That's a good question. I didn't even get far enough to consider that because I was just like, oh yeah, Randy Moss, Justin Jefferson. Those are like obviously 120% locks. And then Thielen, I think, is like 95% lock. Like you add in the story of him being from Minnesota and the underdog, rookie tryout camp, and he was going to go to dental school or whatever it is. And, the rags to riches story, like plus the numbers. I mean, he made an all-pro team, 2 Pro Bowls. Like it has to be him. So I think Diggs would be 4th. If you're going 5th, let me just refresh my memory here and pull up the
let me throw a couple at you.
Okay, yeah.
You could toss out there Sidney Rice, Bernard Berrien. He was wide open. Favre should have thrown it to him. You could also have Percy Harvin there. Yeah. I would probably go with Percy Harvin just because you talk about entertainment value. And I think, look, this is a sport. It's entertainment. I think entertainment and fun matters probably more than drama. If we're tossing drama in there, Percy Harvin would be elite with that. But how many players over the last 25 years in the NFL were more exciting to watch if the football came to them than Percy Harvin? Not that many.
Yeah, I was blanking on him for some reason, but you look at the list and I mean, I think he'd be clearly number 5. Those are the top 5 guys in terms of yardage, which it isn't just a ranking of yardage by any means, but he was electrifying for a couple of years there when he had the ball in his hands. So some of the things that he could do athletically were really special. So I think he would clearly be, him and Diggs would be the 2 guys added to the 5. The one actually other question that I want to know what you think is if you're only picking one Vikings receiver representative from the 2000s, is it Jefferson now or is it still Moss? And you have to consider that 98 and 99 for Moss don't count here. I think it might be Jefferson, just how unbelievable he's been over these 5 years. But I think you could probably make a case either way.
Let me see. I got to look. So Moss was 2000 through 2004, right? Oh man, I mean,
and 2010.
And yeah, now that's one you could definitely throw out. So he did have some of his best seasons in that run. 2003, 111 catches, 17 touchdowns, led the NFL. 15 touchdowns in 2000 to lead the NFL, 1,000-yard seasons every year except for 04. This miserable 04 season, he still caught 13 touchdowns, even though he was dealing with injuries. Jefferson's
like 800, 900 yards ahead of him in terms of just the 2000s. Moss is 24 receiving touchdowns ahead of, like, touchdowns aren't close yet.
Yeah, touchdowns kind of matter. They're sort of a big deal. It's with Moss, it's kind of like anything where it's like when you bring up Michael Jordan. Like, could this guy be like Michael Jordan in some area? And you're like, maybe. Let me pull up his basketball reference. And then you're like, no, probably not. No, I think that Jefferson's darn close. And if you want to make the Jefferson argument, now, of course, entertainment value goes to Randy Moss. But if drama value brings some of that down, Justin Jefferson has zero of that through his entire time here. Jefferson
isn't far off in the entertainment value, I would say.
Yes, right.
With the gritty and the spectacular catches and just the consistent game-to-game greatness.
No, I agree.
I think the case for him would be the consistency, just how dominant he has been since week 3 of the 2020 season with like a handful of quiet games mixed in. And then, you could take some points away from Moss if you wanted to in terms of the off the field element.
Who would you like to go to with a random wide receiver?
Oh my goodness. There are so many possibilities.
Hundreds of options.
Yeah. I think back to, you could go more recent guys. But for me, I love some of the 2000s names, like a Devin Aromashadu, yes. Who I think is Bears legend as well. Just a really cool name. That's the one that sticks out. And then you got guys like Bobby Wade in that era, and like Andre Allison I think he returned a punter at kickoff for a touchdown once. Guys like that in the 2000s I have a soft spot.
I think I will go, if you want to go that direction, I think I'll go Greg Camarillo. Poor Greg Camarillo, who was a good player for Miami, got to the Vikings when everything was just going to hell in 2010. So poor Greg Camarillo came off back-to-back 50 reception seasons with the Dolphins, was looking like he was going to have a pretty good career. And then it just kind of, it didn't work out. As far as guys that we've covered, Chad Beebe seems like the right answer of someone that if you tried to explain Chad Beebe, you're like, yeah, so he caught like 30 catches at Northern Illinois. And he made the team multiple times. Yeah, multiple times. He returned some punts, didn't really do much there, had one long catch against the Packers. It's really tiny. People wanted him to be Jarius Wright.
Game winner against the Panthers in 2020.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He had his moments. He had a couple
dealing on the COVID list.
And 10 years from now, I'll give you 2 more. Dede Westbrook. I was watching the game the other day on NFL Network where they had Jefferson pick the games, and I was watching the one from 2021 when Jefferson goes off against the Packers and they win that game on the last minute field goal. But Dede Westbrook lined up at wide receiver, and I was like, oh yeah, celebrated signing Dede Westbrook would be another one. And
there's some deep cut ones like that.
Tristan Jackson, 2 catches as a Minnesota Viking. I think maybe in the same game. That's
in the Dobbs Atlanta game.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. And then almost caught a touchdown too.
And a 2-point conversion.
And was around forever. It was like on the team for a really long time and had those 2 catches. Tight end Kyle Rudolph, another one. Visante Shenko would also go in this conversation, but I don't see. The thing is that Rudolph played tight end for like the whole decade. So it's kind of hard to fight that one. I think that was pretty easy probably for you.
Yeah, there's a couple of guys here that longevity helps them, and it's like part of the exercise has to be when I think of a 2000s Vikings tight end, or not 2000, but the 25 years of the 2000 century. I think of Kyle Rudolph just because he did it for so long, and that not to be overlooked that he had a pretty solid peak. He was a Pro Bowler a couple of times, Pro Bowl MVP, which doesn't mean anything, but is a fun fact. I think the one argument, even more than Schenko, would just be TJ Hawkinson, because his 2022, he was on pace easily to break the Vikings tight end receiving record set by Joe Sensor, I believe, in like 1981. Had 960 yards, and then he had to miss the last couple of games because of Kirby Joseph taking out his knee. I believe that was that year. Or was that 2023?
It was 2023 where Hawkinson
it was 2023 because it was just last year that he was still recovering from that. So he has the case, and I think if you were to do this in a few years, given that Hawkinson is under contract for a bit, it might end up being him. I think peak wise, like as a receiver, he offers a little more dynamic athleticism than Kyle Rudolph, who was just a big body with great hands, which is valuable. But yeah, I'd give it to Rudolph right now. Great player, great guy, long time Vikings contributor. But I think Hawkinson, if we were to do this in like 2030 and be like the all century team now, and I guess the last 30 years, I think it might be Hawkinson by that point.
I thought Irv Smith Jr. was going to be that guy at one point, and it kept looking like it. And then it just never happened. That injury that happened in 2021 because Mike Zimmer thought it was so freaking important to play his starters in the 4th preseason game. That kind of ended any chance for Irv. And one thing that I kind of blocked out was that Irv was their tight end at the beginning of the 2022 season. And I think it was it against,
got hurt and prompted the trade. Yeah.
Right. And it was against maybe Philadelphia that he could have caught a big pass downfield that went through his hand. Right. It just never materialized. And then he showed up like 20 pounds heavier on the Houston Texans as a blocking tight end last year. So what is happening with Irv Smith? That if we were doing an all team of players that we as reporters have hyped up too much, and I was certainly guilty of that, Irv Smith might get a lot of votes there.
He had some training camp practices. You can attest to this too, where like he was one of the best. He was one of the best players on the field.
He had some games where he was. There were games where he was really
like
good.
This guy is a matchup. Like safeties can't cover him, linebackers can't cover him. It just didn't quite happen.
I got my random one. It has to be because I will never forget a training camp moment in. Must have been 2021, maybe. This would be Brandon Dillon, who went to
the
Marion Flash. That's right. He went to Marion, wherever that is, and he caught a pass in practice. And Kirk Cousins turned around and looked at us and screamed, "The Marion Flash!" And we were like, "Okay." I mean, I guess like that's cool, man. You gave him a nickname. He had one catch as a Minnesota Viking, but I did hear a story that the Vikings were not happy. Some of the upper management, this is previous regime, were like annoyed with Kirk praising Brandon Dillon too much because they were worried about potentially losing him in the cuts. And he ended up with one catch. That was one of the things that the current regime is not so silly about, like the keeping Tashawn Bauer over B-Rob and stuff like that. They just sort of always thought that they were going to lose these practice squad guys. And now that the practice squads are so big, teams don't really poach, but they were always worried about guys getting poached. But I will not forget that, turning around and yelling at us, "The Marion Flash." And we were just like, yeah, I guess. Yeah. So there you go. Brandon Dillon is my guy.
I got one from the early 2010s. John Carlson had a few good years for the Seahawks and then ended up with the Vikings and did not do a whole lot on some not very good teams. But that would be that's one I would go. I mean, you could obviously go like, I don't know if Jim Kleinsasser is considered a tight end or a fullback, but he's one of my favorite Vikings of my childhood. Got like the Rhett Ellisons, David Morgan, like those blocking types. But yeah, shout out to John Carlson.
David Morgan had some serious moments, man. A reception in the let's see, it was to clinch the division, I think, in 2017. He had like a put the Packers away first down catch, and he was a great blocker. So I don't want to go through every single player at the rest of the positions because it's almost July 4th, and there's no need to do that to you. But I'll run through some of the ones that you had, and we can name a quick random one. Offensive tackle Bryant McKinnie and Christian Darrisaw. I know it's pretty recent, but I feel like a guy named Oli Udoh, who hung around forever, just deserves to be named here. Or one of my favorites was Aviant Collins, who Rick Spielman repeatedly referred to as AC Collins, though there was no C other than the C in Collins. And we couldn't figure out whether his name was Aviante, Avian, or Aviant, and he basically never played.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the actual team, very quickly, like that's a little bit of a tricky one because you can go with the two different eras. You had like the 09 team that had Bryant McKinnie and Phil Lodeholt, and then you've got the current team the last few years with Darrisaw and O'Neal. I think those are the only four that are really in the mix at all. So if technically speaking, like if I was choosing a left tackle and a right tackle, then I have to decide between McKinnie and Darrisaw, and it maybe goes to McKinnie off of longevity, and Darrisaw's had some injuries. But I didn't want to make the team and not put Christian Darrisaw on it because he's so unbelievably fun to watch on the film when he's healthy. And so I just kind of cheated and went with both of them. With shout out to Brian O'Neal, has been very consistent, very, very good right tackle. Phil Lodeholt was a very solid right tackle too, but I took both left tackles, and I think Darrisaw in this hypothetical world could figure it out over on the right side.
So I think Darrisaw is a better player, and probably Brian O'Neal would even tell you that. But Brian O'Neal has had the clearly better career so far because Darrisaw with some injuries, and he just has only been on the field a little bit as opposed to O'Neal, who's played almost every game of every year. So I would have picked Brian O'Neal here as opposed to Darrisaw just because he's got much more of accumulation. He's got the Pro Bowl, that kind of thing. But I think if we're looking forward, there's no question that Darrisaw over the next 5 years might be a top 3 tackle in the entire NFL. So I might quibble slightly with that one, but I think you could go either way. The interior, Hutchinson, Matt Burke, and David Dixon. There has not been. We got to pick did you pick a random tackle?
No, I was just trying to think about. I think 20 years from now, Cam Robinson will be a pretty good one, but that just happened. So. Well, I mean, shout out to Jeremiah Searles, friend of the show.
That's a random tackle.
That's pretty good. And then TJ Clemmings in the mid 2010s. Not good. I
might go with Willie Beavers, I believe, one appearance in Thanksgiving 2016. Willie Beavers appeared in a game after being cut as a 4th round pick, was the highest draft pick that got cut out of training camp. That was what he was known for. Then they brought him back, and then they tried to make him a guard, and that didn't happen. And that was the whole story of Willie Beavers.
Last one I just thought of is Storm Norton is a great name.
Oh,
he started at least one game.
Great call. What we used to, Stephen Weatherly and Storm Norton used to go at each other in practice, which was just funny. Yeah. Like weather versus the storm. And
that's pretty good.
Yeah. Sound the alarms. Anyway, interior, everyone has been random over the last number of years for the Vikings on the interior of the offensive line. Steve Hutchinson, Matt Burke, David Dixon. We don't have to talk a lot about the interior offensive line. I get upset. I mean, who would even be I guess Drew Samia. Drew Samia is my random pick because he played maybe 3 games, and one of them was the worst game I've ever seen in my entire life. And that wasn't even the game where he got thrown by DeForest Buckner. That was the game against Seattle where he ran the wrong way on a screen.
Yeah.
And then never played again.
Yeah. That early 2020s Drew Samia, Dakota Dozier was a tough time. The only question with the team is just who you put at right guard. David Dixon was a good 90s guy who played into the 2000s, or you're talking like Joe Berger or something. It's not great. But hey, the interior offensive line in 2025 looks pretty good.
Donovan Jackson, you're already in like 3rd place and you haven't even done anything yet.
Yeah. Will Fries, give us like 2 seasons and you'll be there.
Danny Isadora starting in London against Cleveland would be another one. Okay, defensive tackle, the Williams wall you went with here. Linval Joseph had his moments, but he did not have enough moments as
He's
opposed
close.
to the longevity.
He's
It is
close with Pat
certainly
Williams.
close. His 2017 is one of the most dominant defensive tackle seasons you're ever going to find. But I don't know if there were other years where he just completely took over or was healthy enough to do that. Whereas I feel like Pat Williams was a premier nose tackle of an entire era.
Yeah, if you could take either of those guys though, and I wouldn't fight you on it. They both played, I think it's 6 seasons or 5 seasons. This is the same number of seasons. They both were really physically imposing nose tackles. Linval Joseph, if you look at the PFF grades, PFF loved him.
Oh yeah,
we're talking high 80s, like 90s, like elite grades for a couple years. So I ultimately went with Pat Williams because that dude was slightly even more of just like freakishly large and athletic human being, and I didn't want to break up the Williams wall on this completely made up team that will never play together.
Random defensive tackle.
Random defensive tackle.
I got one. If you want to think for a second.
Recent one that jumps out to me would be Jaleel Johnson.
I like that one.
Like a
once
pick.
Got in a little bit of a tussle with a reporter over McChickens, and you can Google that. But I think I might go either James Lynch or T.Y. McGill. T.Y. McGill, there's a funny
preseason T.Y. McGill was legendary.
And he did play in real games for the Vikings, so it does count. It's always the stories that stick into my mind that T.Y. McGill had 3 sacks in a preseason game, and Kellen Mond was horrible in that game, and there was no other takeaway other than, wow, T.Y. McGill did a thing. So we convinced Dane Mizutani to go ask T.Y. McGill what T.Y. stood for.
And
it wasn't his name. I forget what it was. And I think that his exact response was like, do I have to answer that question? And Dane was like, you don't have to. And then he explained it. But because we looked this up, you would expect TY to be something, but it wasn't. Yeah. So let me see. Let me see what it was. Something like his name was Tyrone, which is Torrone, and he went by TY, but his middle name wasn't a Y. And I think it was because his dad was also named, or his dad was named Tyrone. And so he went by TY, but his name was Tyrone. It was crazy. So there you go. T.Y. McGill.
That's good.
So I'm just sorry, T.Y. McGill, that I don't remember why your name is what it is. Edge rusher. So you've got Jared Allen, which is obvious, and Danielle Hunter. Everson Griffin versus Danielle Hunter is a hard conversation. Hunter was here longer, or at least was a key elite starter longer. I would probably pick him. I will say, though, I think that at their absolute best, and this is talking about Danielle Hunter, who is unbelievable, I would be a little more scared if I was an offensive tackle of Everson Griffin at his absolute best, because he was just lightning. And those quick wins, those guy takes the snap and Everson Griffin eats his face. Yeah. I would go peak Griffin, but Hunter had the better career.
Yeah, that's a close one. Everson Griffin, that spin move, just how unbelievably fast he was able to pull that off and then continue on his path at full speed was pretty ridiculous to watch. He was incredible for a little bit there. But Danielle Hunter, to me, the peak is really close, if not better. I think maybe his game is a little more well-rounded in terms of like setting the edge against the run and all of those boring things that defensive ends and outside linebackers also do, in addition to sacking the quarterback a bunch of times. And then, he played a little longer. So I gave him the nod there, but somewhat close.
The difference between them in total sacks as a Viking is not much. It's about 8.
No, it's not huge.
No one else even gets in the discussion. So I will go with Kenny Willekes as my random guy. There was just a minute there where Kenny Willekes kind of looked like he was going to be a dude for this team. And then I think he tore his ACL maybe, and then he came back, and then he played in a game, and Kenny Willekes.
Yeah, I have to go with my fellow Northwestern product, Afadio Denabo, who Sneaky in 2020 was like their best pass rusher for a bit after they traded Ngakoue, which was a very low bar to be clear, because Danielle Hunter wasn't playing, and they traded Yannick Ngakoue, who they never should have traded for in the first place. But Odenigbo, he had some juice, and he ended up playing. I use him in the grid all the time because he ended up getting on like 6 teams somehow. So shout out to him.
I also nominate Eddie Yarborough, who had an amazing preseason game against the Vikings. So, of course, they went out and got him, and nothing ever happened after that. But one time, a listener called out Andrew Kramer for not knowing how many snaps Eddie Yarborough had, and I thought that was hilarious.
You know who that makes me think of really quick? I think his name was Jonathan Brailford.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, yeah. Oh, yeah.
He played at one point. At one point, he played like 15 snaps in one game, and he had like a 95 PFF grade. So if you
know the game, I know you know the game.
Jaguars?
Yes. Yeah. In 2020, Mike Glennon tried to run, and Jordan Brail, is it Jordan? I think it's Jordan Brailford. Right?
Jordan Brailford, not Jonathan. Sorry.
Brailford chases him down from behind and strips him.
Incredible.
And helps the Vikings ultimately win the game. And then
if you sorted the PFF with no snap minimum, he was the number one. Like, it's him, and then like all your superstars after that. That was pretty good. If
someone knows Jordan Brailford, I want to do a story on Jordan Brailford. Please contact me. Linebackers, this again, I think is depends. If you asked Mike Zimmer, I know who he'd say. He would probably say Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks. And I also think in the next 5 years, Blake Cashman is going to put his name here. But Chad Greenway, I mean, this is, we're talking about one of the Pro Bowl players. They drafted a real centerpiece of the team for a long time. When I got here, he was toward the end of his career and had sort of been bumped in the lineup by Eric Kendricks. And then Kendricks, the All-Pro season. It is kind of hard to make any debates about this. This is why we're picking random ones as well, because Chad Greenway and Eric Kendricks just make so much sense here.
I think you can make a case for Barr with some of his early career seasons, like 2015, his second year. PFF loved. He had like a 90+ season long grade there. And he made 4 straight Pro Bowls. I don't know that he necessarily should have made 4 straight Pro Bowls. That's kind of like when Xavier Rhodes made it in like 2019, and it was just like, oh, we know his name. Pro Bowl voting, a bit flawed, but I think Greenway, it's a little bit like Kyle Rudolphy, where he just like played for a decade and was good and legitimately had a real peak as being a Pro Bowl level player and contributor, and did a lot of good things. So I think he has to be on there. And then it's Kendricks or Barr, and 2019 Eric Kendricks, the coverage ability, 2019 and 2020 was just pretty special. I think it was 2020 in that Packers game where Dalvin Cook went off when Kendricks ran like 30 yards up the seam with Devontae Adams and full out leaping pass deflection, where I was like, oh, that is an unreal football player right there. So Kendricks makes it over Barr, but it's not like I had to think about it a little bit.
I feel you on that. And the argument that Mike Zimmer used to always make for Anthony Barr that I completely agreed with was that Barr was the defensive play caller. And all the time we talk about now how important Harrison Smith is, how important Byron Murphy is, how important Blake Cashman is for their communication abilities. And that was Barr. Barr was the one, him and Harrison Smith, who were playing the mind games with opposing quarterbacks, reading opposing quarterbacks, their adjustments, making changes, setting the front, like all that sort of stuff. And he did so for elite defenses. I mean, Barr was only really a part of one defense that wasn't great, I think, because he got here in 2014 and they were okay. They were improved. But then 2015, great. 16, really good. 17, elite. 18, really good. 19, really good. And then he gets hurt in 20. So every year that he was in that position, they were really good. But I think Greenway's just got a little bit of a stronger overall case. But you could definitely go either way with that.
And shout out to, he wasn't in the mix for one of the 2 spots necessarily, but if you were to go 4, I think it's pretty clearly Greenway, Kendricks, Barr, and then EJ Henderson was actually a very good player for a while.
I'm going to go Blake Lynch. All I remember from Blake Lynch is that game where Alvin Kamara scored, was it 6 touchdowns?
6 touchdowns, Christmas 2020, yeah.
He had to start. And we were leading up to the game. We were like, oh, this should be interesting. Like, he's getting us. Oh, no, it wasn't.
I want to say it was like Hardy Nickerson playing with him too in that game.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, not great. Shout out to Ben Gedeon. Isn't he's pretty random
No,
at this
that's
point.
random. That's random.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. That's pretty random. And Audie Cole too in the 2010s. Pretty good special teams guy.
All the people who watched that one preseason game will never forget Audie Cole. Safeties, you got Harrison Smith and Corey Chavis. Did you debate that one at all? Because I think you could have gone with maybe Cam Bynum here. It's been such a merry-go-round. Anderson Dejo was very good for a little bit. Anthony Harris had his moment enough to get franchise tagged. That we'll never forget is
Yeah,
Anthony Harris got franchise tagged and then I think was out of the league like 2 years later. But Javis was an above average player, maybe for a little longer.
yeah. So obviously, there's no debate about Harrison Smith. Is the guy who comes to mind, like head and shoulders over any other safety of the quarter century for the Vikings. But then the second spot, you can debate a variety of guys. Like pure football resume wise, there's a real case for Darren Sharper. I didn't want to put him on this team. If you don't know why, you can Google it.
I wasn't even going to go there. I was just,
I guess I didn't even need to bring it up, but I didn't want to put him on the team. I like Corey Chavis there, but I think you can also any of the more recent guys, which would be Cam Bynum, Anthony Harris, and even Josh Metellus. I think there's a case for with the last few years and how versatile he is. I mean, if they work out an extension and if he's here beyond this next season, I think he has a chance to end up in that number 2 spot. But I ended up going with Chavis. He did it for a little longer. Had a really good 03 season. I think like 8 picks. So he got onto the team.
I will throw out Brian Russell, who had 9 interceptions in a single season for the Vikings and then really never did a lot and ended up in Cleveland very quickly after. But if we're talking peak seasons, 9 picks is crazy for 1 year, even in that early 2000s era. I don't have a lot of other ones, but the random one for me is Miles Dorn, because if Miles Dorn was doing this podcast with us, I wouldn't know what he looked like. It was in the time where we were a little more separated from the players, the COVID era and things like that. And yet it always seemed like we would talk about him, but I don't remember anything about what he did in practice or ever like, this guy, Miles Dorn, might be on the rise.
Yeah. I think he and Blake Lynch were both in the same, like 2020 undrafted class.
Right, because we weren't in the locker room, so I didn't get to know these guys, or I couldn't like put a finger on who they were. And sometimes I think about like when we talk about these random players, how some of them were just names that we said in practice reports. Like Miles Dorn made a couple of plays out there, and then you never even see these people. So anyway, that's the one for me. You got one?
Yeah, the early 2010s, Hussein Abdullah was a pretty cool one. I think he like played a game once or twice, and it was some religious holiday of his faith, and so he like had fasted for a super long time, and so he hadn't eaten in like a day or like days, and he went out and still played a really, really good game, which is just incredible to me to do in the NFL. So shout out to Hussein Abdullah, and like Mistral Raymond was that same time period too. It's super random.
Cornerback, Antoine Winfield, Xavier Rhodes, and Byron Murphy Jr., which I think is a good pick after last year, elevated himself. For me, I mean, Brian Williams gets tossed out there, I think, had a good number of interceptions, was not a part of great defenses. Trey Waynes was a part of great defenses, but for his first couple of years, they didn't even really want to play him until 2016, and then 2017, he played a lot. And when it comes to the random corners, I know my pick is Tremaine Brock, because I recall when the Vikings picked up Tremaine Brock, he had been released from the 49ers, and there were like big arguments over whether that was to replace Trey Waynes. I was like, no, like what? But that just kind of shows you that where Waynes was, that even as part of that epic, unbelievable 2015 draft class, never really quite lived up to what he was supposed to be. And the rest is sort of just a rotating cast of characters through other than when it's Wayne's, and Terrence Newman would be on this list probably. Maybe Captain Munnerlyn gets a mention as a random player who had a really good start to the 2016 season. But through a lot of these years, the Vikings kind of struggled to find their corners.
Yeah, corner is a little bit like guard. It just has been kind of a weak spot for a lot of this century for the Vikings. And each one has a guy. Like oftentimes you're like, oh, the 2009 team had a guy like Steve Hutchinson, and then Antoine Winfield obviously is easily on this list. He actually made, like, PFF did one of these for the whole league, and they put Antoine Winfield on there as one of their 3 corners, which I thought was kind of incredible. I don't know that he necessarily quite should be, but I'm all for it because Antoine Winfield was awesome and underrated, and the PFF grades really, really loved him, which I think is cool because maybe sometimes his impact didn't show up in terms of gaudy box score stats, but he's got to be here. And then Xavier Rhodes is easy just because of the peak, how good he was in like 16, 17, that range. But then, yeah, the third guy I thought about, like Cedric Griffin and Brian Williams and Trey Waynes and all these. I was like, did old Patrick Peterson do enough? No. So I went with Byron Murphy after last year because of how really, really impressive that season was. And, you know, if you're talking at all about like imagining this as an actual football team, like I can put Byron Murphy in the slot and then I can put Rhodes and Winfield on the outside and it works all nicely. My random guy that I'll shout out, and I remember this, that I could probably find the tweet, but there was a training camp practice in 2021, I think, where I was like, I think Holton Hill is the Vikings' best cornerback. Because he was balling in this practice. He was making plays left and right. He was long, athletic. And then that is a reminder with training camp coming up in a few weeks that if somebody plays well in training camp, let's not go crazy. Let's not overreact. And I'm going to overreact because it's the sample that we have to watch sometimes. But shout out to Holton Hill, or Hilton Holton, as I believe Mike Zimmer once called him.
Everson Griffin called him
that. Okay.
Yep. In a press conference, Everson Griffin said Hilton Holton. Yep. I remember that era because when he came back after a weed arrest, Mike Zimmer was just totally done with him. And our friend Chad Graff, I think, asked Zimmer, he said, Holton Hill looks pretty good out there in practice. And he said something like, oh, you've been watching the practice tape? And Chad was like, well, I don't know. Like, what do you think of him? And he said, I don't think of him. It's like, okay, I guess Mike's done.
Classic Zimmer.
I miss those. I don't miss all of it, but I definitely miss those. I will go I'll match your alliteration, and I will go Harrison Hand because 2020, that same Alvin Kamara 6-touchdown game, Harrison Hand picks off Drew Brees. And of course we were all like, whoa, this guy's got some playmaking ability and everything else. And that was it for Harrison Hand. Nice guy though. Your kicker, punter, and returners, Longwell, there's no other pick. Cluey, I probably same deal. Like, I don't think that they've just had a rotating cast. And then the return specialists, Cordero Patterson and Marcus Sherrills. And if you were combining it into one and you wrote this, Percy Harvin would be the most, if you're trying to return one punt for a touchdown, you're probably throwing Percy Harvin back there over Sherrills. But the resumes of Patterson and Sherrills are among the best in the entire league during the last 25 years. So that means random kicker, random punter, and random return specialists. Random return specialist, punter, I'll go Brandon Zylstra as my random punt returner. Random kick returner might be hard. I don't know how many kick returns they've even had.
No, it's tough because in recent years they just haven't.
And Ken Nwangwu was awesome.
Which is why, like, Silas Bolden might make the team this year, potentially. Because kickoff, they're going to have to return kickoffs this year if the touchback is at the 35. He's more punt returner. But, the one thing I'll say really quickly is, like, kicker, I think it's definitely Ryan Longwell. But Blair Walsh had the best season as a rookie in 2012. But unfortunately, Blair Walsh, the next few years did not go well enough for him to make this team. Obviously, there's a certain kick that I think is a little disqualifying, perhaps. But But yeah, I'm trying to think. I mentioned earlier in the receivers, Andre Allison. That's a pretty random punt returner from the 2000s.
Apparently, Matt Asiata had 10 kick returns.
That's probably like those ones where they squib it a little bit and he ends up. I don't know.
I mean, Adrian Peterson having 17 of them is pretty wild when you consider just how much that disappeared, that he was actually doing that a little bit early in his career.
Rookie year, yeah.
Okay, I'll give you one. I'll give you a random kick returner, Amir Smith-Marset. People loved Amir Smith-Marset.
That is a good one.
I don't know why, but they did. And maybe Jordan Berry, punter.
That's pretty good. Jeff Locke as a punter. I don't.
Is it random? Jordan Berry's pretty random.
Jordan Berry is pretty random.
Locke, let me look for punt. We can't wrap this podcast. You've got things to do. You've got a life, and I'm just keeping you from that so we can look up some random punters. Because I just don't think there have been that many. Okay, Matt Weil was pretty random, but it was a full year. Because when I think of random, I think a guy shows up and punts for like a week and then disappears. Gosh. Eddie Johnson. I don't know who Eddie Johnson is.
I don't either.
Someone named Lee Johnson punted 25 times for the Vikings in 2001. He gets it. Good job, Lee Johnson. Your award is in the mail.
Ryan Longwell punted once, it says.
He did. Yeah, I'm sure that was probably for an injury. So let me ask you this question. I know this has been a fun and ridiculous discussion here. Of the current roster, give me the players who will be on the all 3 sets of 10 years team. How do you
put all 30% of the century?
Right, when it's 2033, right? The all 33.3 continuous team in 2033.
The all first third of the century. We mentioned a few of them over the course of the show. Like I think Hawkinson will be on there. I think you got a good chance at Blake Cashman. You got to look at the positions that are a little bit light. Like Donovan Jackson or Will Fries could easily wind up on there. Josh Metellus, if he ends up here for a while. Could JJ McCarthy be there by 2033? That if he's the quarterback for the next 8 or 9 seasons and plays really well and perhaps even wins a certain game, then I think he'd be the easy choice over the Dantes and Kirks. I don't know. I don't know who else necessarily would have a chance to get on there.
I was thinking about maybe Jonathan Grenard, but it's just going to be so difficult to beat Danielle Hunter or Jared Allen. If you're competing against all of those era, if we were just doing, maybe an all decade team by 2030, then someone like Jonathan Grenard would have a good chance at that. Cashman would have a good chance at that. And maybe I wouldn't want to totally write off Jordan Addison as being part of a next decade team from 2020 to 2030, because Adam Thielen, a lot of his damage was done from 2016 to 2019. And Jordan Addison does have a chance there, but it's probably the younger offensive lineman who could unseat somebody if we were doing it that way. So
who else could get on there is Will Reichard.
What? Yes.
Over Ryan Longwell.
And whoever is the kick returner this year, you've all got a chance. Hope for good kicking springs eternal. Anyway, Will Ragatz, this was very fun to do this, and it's the exact type of stress-free content that I think everybody can enjoy while they are going to their lake house over the 4th of July weekend. So I had a lot of fun with this discussion. I know we ran through it, but all of your explanations there over on Bring Me the News and SI on Vikings. So make sure you go check that out. Follow you on the internet and wherever you're on social media, you can find Will. So anyway, great stuff, man. I can't wait for camp, dude. I'm getting antsy. Let's get some football going.
I'm at the time of year where I'm like, I am enjoying the time away from football because then the season grind starts. But 3 weeks from now or whenever, I'll be ready for the football.
This year's a little different, just a little different. So, all right. Thanks for your time, Will, and we'll see you again soon.
Yep.